Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and let your mind drift into the vast ocean of ideas. Tonight, we journey through 100 philosophical concepts, some ancient, some modern, all designed to expand your thinking while guiding you into a peaceful slumber. There are no right or wrong answers, only questions that lead you deeper into the mystery of existence. Let's begin. 1. Plato's cave. Are we only seeing shadows of a greater truth? Imagine you've spent your entire life inside a dark cave, chained in place, staring at a wall. Behind you, unseen, is a fire, and between you and the fire, people walk by, carrying objects. The only reality you know consists of the flickering shadows of these objects cast on the wall in front of you. This is Plato's allegory of the cave, a metaphor for how humans perceive reality. Just like the prisoners in the cave, we might only be experiencing a small, distorted fragment of what's truly out there. What if the world we know is just a collection of shadows, and we have yet to turn around and see the full picture? Now imagine one of the prisoners breaks free. As they step outside the cave, their eyes adjust to the blinding light of the sun. They realize that the world is far greater and more vibrant than they ever imagined. They see trees, rivers, mountains, things they never believed could exist. If they returned to the cave and tried to explain this to the others, they would sound like a madman. This raises a haunting question. What if we, too, are still trapped in our own cave, unable to see a greater reality beyond our senses? Perhaps everything we take for granted, colors, time, even our own identities, are merely reflections of something much deeper. Plato used this allegory to illustrate the difference between appearance and reality, suggesting that most people accept what they see at face value without questioning what lies beyond. It challenges us to consider whether we are truly seeking knowledge or just accepting what we've been told. Maybe, just maybe, reality as we know it is just the surface, and the truth is waiting for us outside the cave, if only we have the courage to step into the light. 2. Descartes, evil demon. What if everything you know is an illusion? Close your eyes and imagine this. Everything you see, hear, and feel, your entire reality, is being controlled by an all-powerful deceiver, an entity so skilled in manipulation that it makes you believe in a world that doesn't exist. This was the thought experiment proposed by the philosopher René Descartes. He asked, what if an evil demon is tricking you into believing in a reality that isn't real? Every object you see, every sensation you feel, even your own thoughts, what if they're all fabricated illusions? Descartes used this idea to demonstrate the fragility of human knowledge. If such a deceiver existed, how could we ever be sure of anything? Our senses, which we rely on for truth, could be misleading us at every turn. Think about a dream. When you're inside it, it feels real. You hear sounds, feel emotions, experience movement. But upon waking, you realize it was nothing but an illusion. What if life itself is just a waking dream, controlled by an unseen force? But there's a glimmer of hope. Descartes argued that even if an evil demon were deceiving us, there is still one thing that must be real. 3. The brain in a vat. Could your entire life be a simulation? Imagine waking up one day and discovering that everything you've ever known, your family, your friends, the entire world, has been a lie. In reality, your brain is floating in a vat of liquid, hooked up to a supercomputer that feeds you an artificial reality. Every sight, sound, and sensation you've ever experienced was nothing more than electrical signals carefully programmed to make you believe in a world that doesn't exist. This is the brain in a vat thought experiment, a modern take on Descartes' evil demon, often used in discussions about the nature of consciousness and reality. The idea raises a disturbing question. How do we know that what we experience is real? Our brains don't interact with the world directly. They rely on sensory input to build a picture of reality. If advanced technology could perfectly simulate those inputs, we would never know the difference. Think about virtual reality. Even though you know you're standing in your living room, your body reacts to what it sees. Your heart races when you fall in a VR game, even though you're perfectly safe. Now, imagine a version of VR so perfect that you never realize you're inside it. Couldn't that be happening to us right now? This thought experiment is closely related to the simulation hypothesis, which suggests that our entire universe might be an advanced computer simulation. Some physicists even argue that the laws of physics resemble the rules of a programmed reality. If that's the case, then what are we? Conscious beings, or just lines of code running on some cosmic computer? Perhaps we'll never know. But if we were in a simulation, would it even matter? If this world is all we've ever known, then for all intents and purposes, isn't it real enough? 4. Zeno's paradoxes. Is movement just an illusion? Imagine you're in a race against a tortoise. To make it fair, the tortoise gets a head start. Now, before you can reach the tortoise's starting position, it has moved a little further. When you reach that new position, it has moved again. No matter how fast you run, the tortoise will always be a tiny step ahead. This is one of Zeno's paradoxes, and it suggests something mind-boggling. Movement itself might be an illusion. Zeno's paradoxes are designed to show that if we break down motion into infinitely small parts, it becomes impossible. Think about a simple action, like walking across a room. To get to the other side, you must first get halfway there. But before that, you must get halfway to the halfway point, and so on. Since there are an infinite number of halfway points, how do you ever move at all? Mathematically, it seems like motion should be impossible, yet in reality, we move effortlessly. So where is the flaw in our reasoning? Some philosophers argue that the paradox exposes a deeper issue with how we perceive time and space. If time is made up of indivisible moments, then motion must jump between. 5. The simulation hypothesis. Are we living in a computer program? Imagine a future civilization so advanced that it can simulate entire worlds, complete with conscious beings who don't realize they're inside a simulation. Now, ask yourself, if such a civilization existed, wouldn't they run countless simulations? If so, wouldn't the number of simulated beings vastly outnumber the real ones? If that's true, the odds suggest that we are likely inside one of those simulations. This is the simulation hypothesis, proposed by philosopher Nick Bostrom, and it suggests that our reality might be nothing more than an incredibly detailed computer program. The idea isn't just science fiction. It's supported by some strange discoveries in physics. For example, the way particles behave at a fundamental level sometimes resembles the way information is processed in a computer. The universe also seems to have limits, much like a video game has rendering boundaries. If we are in a simulation, it would explain many of the mysteries of reality, such as why physics is so mathematically structured and why consciousness itself remains so elusive. Could we just be lines of code experiencing what we think is reality? But here's the big question. Would it even matter? If we've never known any other reality, does it make a difference whether it's real or not? Maybe what truly matters isn't whether we live in a base reality or a simulation, but what we choose to do with our experience. If we are in a simulation, then whoever is running it gave us the ability to think, dream, and create. And in the end, isn't that what makes life meaningful, no matter what level of reality we exist on? 6. Phenomenalism. Does the world exist only when perceived? Imagine you're sitting alone in your room. You turn your head to look out the window, and as soon as you do, the outside world comes into focus. But the moment you turn away, what happens to it? Does it still exist in the same way? Or does it only appear when you perceive it? This is the core idea of phenomenalism, a philosophy that suggests reality only exists as long as it is being observed. Think about a video game. When you move your character, the game world is rendered in front of you, but everything outside your field of view doesn't exist in detail until you turn toward it. Could our universe work the same way? If nobody is looking at the moon, does it still exist, or does it only activate when someone observes it? This idea has eerie connections to quantum mechanics, where particles behave differently when measured, almost as if they decide to exist only when watched. Phenomenalism challenges the idea of an objective reality. Maybe things don't exist as independent objects, but only as experiences in our minds. If this is true, then everything we know, the sun, the stars, even time itself, only exists as long as someone is perceiving it. So what happens when there's no one left to observe? Does reality 7. The veil of perception. Can we ever experience reality directly? Imagine you're wearing a pair of tinted glasses. Everything you see is filtered through their color, distorting your perception of the world. Now, what if I told you that your mind itself is a pair of tinted glasses? Every experience you have is filtered through your senses: sight, sound, touch, taste, and smell. But do these senses give you an accurate picture of reality, or just a version of it that your brain constructs? This is the question behind the veil of perception, a philosophical idea that suggests we never experience reality directly. We only experience our interpretation of it. Consider color, for example. The sky looks blue to us, but that's just how our brains interpret certain wavelengths of light. To a dog, the sky might not look blue at all. To a creature with different sensory organs, it might be something entirely unrecognizable. If even something as simple as color is a product of our perception, how much of what we take for granted is really how the world is? Perhaps we live in a reality that is fundamentally different from what we imagine, but we'll never know because we are forever trapped behind the veil of our own perception. Philosophers like John Locke and Immanuel Kant argued that we can never access things as they really are, only things as they appear to us. This means that what we call reality might just be a mental representation, not the real thing. So, if we can never step outside our own perceptions, how can we ever be sure of anything? Maybe reality is far stranger than we realize, and we are only scratching the surface of what truly exists. 8. Solipsism. Is your mind the only thing that truly exists? Take a moment to think about your entire life. Every person you've met, every place you've visited, every conversation you've had, it has all been experienced inside your mind. You don't directly perceive the outside world. You only experience your thoughts about it. Now ask yourself, what if nothing else actually exists? What if you are the only conscious being, and everything else, the world, other people, even time itself, is just a projection of your own mind? This is the unsettling idea of solipsism, the belief that only your own consciousness is real. Of course, this sounds absurd at first. Other people seem to have thoughts, emotions, and independent lives, just like you. But how do you know that? You've never actually been inside another person's mind. Every conversation, every interaction, every emotion you see in someone else is just something your mind is perceiving. For all you know, they could be lifeless illusions, like characters in a dream. After all, when you dream, everything feels real, until you wake up. What if you never wake up? Solipsism is impossible to prove or disprove, making it one of the most disturbing ideas in philosophy. If it's true, then the entire universe is nothing more than a construct of your 9. Boltzmann Brains. Could you be a random consciousness floating in space? Imagine the entire universe disappeared, leaving behind only empty space. Now imagine that, by sheer chance, a fully formed brain, complete with memories, thoughts, and emotions, spontaneously appeared in that void, just for a brief moment, before vanishing again. As absurd as this sounds, physics suggests that this could happen. In an infinite universe, randomness can produce anything, even a thinking brain floating in nothingness. This is the terrifying concept of the Boltzmann brain. Here's the catch. If Boltzmann brains can exist, and they vastly outnumber normal beings like us, then statistically, it's more likely that you are one of them. In other words, there's a small but real possibility that you were never born, never had a past, and are simply a momentary consciousness that thinks it has lived a full life. Your entire existence, your childhood, your memories, your relationships, could all be false impressions that just popped into existence for an instant. Of course, this idea is deeply unsettling, but it forces us to ask an important question. How do we define reality? Is it based on longevity, consistency, or simply the experience of consciousness? If your memories feel real, does it even matter if they actually happened? Whether you are a Boltzmann brain or a long-lived consciousness in a stable universe, what truly matters is the experience of being you here and now, even if the nature of your existence is an eternal mystery. 10. Doppelganger Theory. Is there another you? What if, somewhere in the universe, there was another version of you? Not just a look-alike, but a person who has lived almost the exact same life, made the same decisions, and shares the same thoughts. According to the laws of probability, if the universe is infinite, then this is not only possible, it's inevitable. There could be countless versions of you, existing in distant galaxies, living lives nearly identical to yours. The idea of doppelgangers has fascinated philosophers and scientists alike. In quantum physics, there's a theory called the many worlds interpretation, which suggests that every time a decision is made, reality splits into multiple timelines, each containing a different outcome. This means that in some other version of reality, you chose a different career, met different people, or even never existed at all. If these alternate versions of you are out there, what does that say about identity? Are you still you if another version of yourself is living a different life somewhere else? But the concept gets even stranger. What if your memories, thoughts, and experiences are not unique to you, but are just variations of an infinite number of consciousnesses playing out in different corners of reality? If every possible version of your life exists somewhere, then what does that say about free will? Are you choosing your actions, or are you simply playing out a 11. The Ship of Theseus. When do you stop being you? Imagine an ancient wooden ship. Over time, its wooden planks begin to rot, and one by one, they are replaced with new planks. After many years, every single plank, nail, and rope has been replaced. Now here's the question. Is it still the same ship? If not, at what point did it stop being the original? This is the Ship of Theseus Paradox, a thought experiment that challenges our understanding of identity and continuity. Now, take this idea and apply it to yourself. Every cell in your body is constantly dying and being replaced. In fact, after about 7 years, almost all of the cells in your body have been replaced. Are you still the same person you were 7 years ago? If not, then at what point did the old you stop existing and the new you take over? And if your body can change while still being you, does that mean you are more than just your physical form? Some philosophers argue that identity is not tied to physical components, but to continuity of consciousness. Others suggest that identity is an illusion. There is no fixed you, just an ever-changing process. If that's true, then what does it mean to be yourself? Perhaps identity isn't about physicality, but about the story we tell ourselves, the unbroken thread of memories and experiences that make us feel like the same person, even if, physically, we are completely different beings from who we once were. 12. The Grandfather Paradox. Can you travel back in time and erase yourself? Imagine you build a time machine and travel back to the past. While you're there, you accidentally or deliberately prevent your grandfather from meeting your grandmother. If they never meet, then one of your parents is never born. And if your parent is never born, then you were never born. But if you were never born, then how did you travel back in time in the first place? This is the Grandfather Paradox, a classic time travel dilemma that exposes the contradictions in changing the past. This paradox has fascinated physicists and storytellers alike. If time travel to the past were possible, it would create logical inconsistencies, causing events that should prevent themselves from happening. Some theories suggest that the universe would correct itself, preventing changes from taking effect. Others propose the many worlds interpretation, where altering the past doesn't change your timeline but instead creates an entirely new parallel universe. But here's a deeper question. What does this paradox say about fate and free will? If time travel is possible, does it mean history is already set in stone, making free will an illusion? Or is the universe a vast branching tree where every choice spawns a new timeline? And if time itself is fluid, does that mean the past, present, and future are all happening at the same time, and we're just experiencing it one moment at a time? 13. The Infinite Monkey Theorem. Could randomness create masterpieces? Picture a monkey sitting at a typewriter, randomly hitting keys. Now imagine an infinite number of monkeys, all doing the same thing. Mathematically speaking, if they type for an infinite amount of time, at least one of them will eventually type the complete works of Shakespeare, purely by chance. This is the Infinite Monkey Theorem, a thought experiment that explores the power of randomness over an infinite scale. This idea has deep implications for probability, creativity, and even the nature of reality itself. If randomness can produce something as complex as Shakespeare's plays, could the entire universe itself have been created through pure chance? After all, the laws of physics, the arrangement of galaxies, and even life itself could be the result of countless random processes playing out over vast timescales. In other words, is the order we see in the universe just an illusion, the result of infinite randomness creating patterns that look intentional? But there's another layer to this paradox. If randomness can create anything given infinite time, Does that mean creativity is just an extremely unlikely but inevitable arrangement of random events? Does it mean that consciousness itself, your thoughts, ideas, and personality, could one day emerge from sheer probability somewhere in the vastness of the cosmos? If so, what does that say about meaning? Is everything just chance, or is there something deeper at work? 14. The Sorites Paradox. When does a heap of sand stop being a heap? Imagine you have a heap of sand. Now, remove a single grain. It's still a heap, right? Remove another grain. Still a heap. But if you keep removing grains, at what point does it stop being a heap? And if removing a single grain doesn't make a difference, then how can any number of grains ever not be a heap? This is the Sorites Paradox, a challenge to our understanding of vague concepts. This paradox applies to many real-world ideas, like aging. When does a person go from being young to old? There's no single moment when it happens, yet we still use these terms as if they have clear boundaries. The same applies to concepts like wealth, baldness, and even consciousness. When exactly does a collection of atoms stop being a lifeless object and become a thinking being? The Sorites Paradox reveals how many of the words we rely on are based on vague, shifting definitions. It suggests that the world isn't as neatly categorized as we like to think. Maybe reality isn't made up of clear distinctions, but of subtle, continuous changes. And if that's true, then perhaps the labels we use, rich, poor, smart, foolish, strong, weak, are not absolute truths, but fluid constructs that change depending on how we choose to see them. 15. The Paradox of Free Will. Are you really in control of your actions? Think about the last decision you made. What to eat, what to wear, what to say. It felt like a choice, but was it really? Neuroscience suggests that decisions might be made in our brains before we're even aware of them. If our thoughts and actions are determined by prior causes, our genetics, our environment, our past experiences, then are we actually making choices, or are we just playing out a script written by forces beyond our control? This is the paradox of free will, one of the deepest philosophical dilemmas. If free will doesn't exist, then everything that happens, including your thoughts right now, was set in motion billions of years ago, like dominoes falling one after another. On the other hand, if free will does exist, then where does it come from? If every event has a cause, how can any decision be truly independent? Wouldn't it have to come from nothing? An effect without a cause? This paradox challenges everything we believe about morality, responsibility, and identity. If we don't truly control our actions, can we be held accountable for them? Or are we just passengers in a vast, unfolding chain of cause and effect? Whether free will is real or an illusion, the paradox reminds us of a fundamental truth. We feel like we are making choices, and maybe in the end, that feeling is all that really matters. 16. The Paradox of the Liar. Can a statement be both true and false? Imagine someone saying, "This statement is false." Now take a moment to think about it. If the statement is true, then it must be false, as it claims. But if it's false, that means it must actually be true. This is the liar's paradox, a seemingly simple sentence that throws logic into chaos. It reveals a fundamental problem. Can a statement be both true and false at the same time? This paradox has puzzled philosophers for centuries, because it challenges the basic rules of logic. Normally, something is either true or false, but the liar's paradox refuses to fit into either category. It exposes a strange flaw in our understanding of truth itself. How do we define truth? Is it simply something that corresponds to reality, or does it depend on language and interpretation? If we can construct a sentence that breaks logic, does that mean our understanding of truth is flawed? The implications of this paradox go beyond wordplay. It applies to self-reference in many fields, from computer science to mathematics. In programming, self-referential loops can cause infinite crashes. In law and ethics, self-contradictory rules can make justice impossible. And in philosophy, it suggests that absolute truth may not be as stable as we think. If we can't even fully define what it means for a statement to be true, how can we be sure of anything? 17. The Paradox of Tolerance. Can unlimited tolerance destroy itself? Tolerance is often seen as a virtue, the idea that society should allow all opinions and beliefs to exist freely. But what happens when an intolerant ideology emerges within a tolerant society? Should that ideology be tolerated? or does tolerance itself have limits? This is the paradox of tolerance, a concept introduced by philosopher Karl Popper. It suggests that if a society is too tolerant, it may allow intolerant forces to rise, eventually destroying tolerance itself. Imagine a city that welcomes all ideas, including those that promote violence, oppression, or hatred. If these intolerant ideas grow strong enough, they could take over and remove tolerance altogether, banning free speech, silencing opposing views, and enforcing strict control. In this scenario, tolerance has led to its own demise. So does that mean some level of intolerance is necessary to protect tolerance? This paradox raises complex ethical and political questions. Where should the line be drawn? How do we balance free expression with the need to prevent harmful ideologies from spreading? And if tolerance has limits, then who decides what is and isn't acceptable? The paradox of tolerance forces us to confront the uncomfortable reality that absolute freedom may, paradoxically, require restrictions in order to survive. 18. The Teletransportation Paradox. If you were cloned, would it still be you? Imagine stepping into a futuristic teleportation machine. It scans every atom in your body, then destroys you completely. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, an exact copy of you, down to your last thought, is reconstructed from new atoms. This new version thinks it is you, remembers everything you did, and feels exactly as you did. But here's the question. Is it really you? Or did you just die? And this is only a copy? This is the Teletransportation Paradox, a mind-bending challenge to our understanding of identity. If every single atom of your body is replaced but your consciousness remains intact, does that mean you have continued to exist? Or have you been destroyed and replaced by an imposter that only thinks it is you? If consciousness is just a pattern, then does it matter if it moves from one body to another? This paradox has real-world implications. In medicine, organ transplants replace parts of the body, but we still consider the person the same. In philosophy, it challenges whether selfhood is tied to continuity or simply a perception of being oneself. If consciousness can be copied, does that mean there could be multiple versions of you, all thinking they are the real one? And if so, which one is the real you? Or does that concept even make sense at all? 19. The paradox of inquiry. How can you search for something you don't know? Imagine you are trying to learn something completely new, something you have no prior knowledge of. How do you even begin to search for it? If you don't know what it is, how can you recognize it when you find it? And if you already recognize it, doesn't that mean you already knew it? This is the paradox of inquiry, a philosophical dilemma originally posed by Socrates. This paradox suggests that learning is an impossible task. If we don't know something, we can't search for it. But if we do know it, there's no need to search. So how does knowledge ever increase? One possible answer is that we don't actually learn new things. We just uncover truths that were always within us, waiting to be discovered. This is the idea behind innate knowledge, which suggests that deep truths already exist in our minds, and learning is just the process of remembering them. But there's another perspective. Maybe learning is about recognition, not searching. We may not know what we're looking for, but we know when something clicks in our minds. This paradox forces us to rethink how knowledge works. Is learning about absorbing new information, or is it about awakening something we already had within us? And if knowledge is already buried inside our minds, then what else might we be capable of uncovering? 20. The observer effect. Does reality change when you look at it? In the world of quantum physics, something strange happens when you observe tiny particles. They behave differently just because they're being watched. This is the observer effect, a bizarre phenomenon that suggests reality itself is influenced by observation. If this applies on a deeper level, it raises an unsettling question. Does reality exist only because we perceive it? Think about your surroundings, the chair you're sitting on, the air around you, even the stars in the sky. They all seem real. But what if reality doesn't fully exist until someone observes it? Quantum experiments show that particles can exist in multiple states at once, until they are measured. The moment we observe them, they seem to choose a single state. This suggests that observation might be what creates reality, rather than just revealing it. The implications of this are profound. If observation shapes reality, then what does that say about the universe before conscious beings existed? Did nothing exist before there was something to perceive it? And if consciousness plays a role in shaping the world, does that mean reality is not an objective, fixed structure, but something fluid, changing, and dependent on awareness? The observer effect challenges us to consider the possibility that the universe is not just something we live in, but something we actively shape by perceiving it. 21. Zeno's paradoxes. Can you ever truly reach your destination? Imagine you're walking toward a door. To get there, you must first cover half the distance, then half of the remaining distance, then half again, and so on. No matter how small the remaining distance gets, there will always be another halfway point to cross. If this is true, then how can you ever actually reach the door? This is Zeno's paradox, a logical puzzle that seems to suggest motion itself is impossible. On a mathematical level, this paradox challenges the very concept of infinity. If you keep dividing the remaining distance in half, does that mean you have to cross an infinite number of steps? If so, how can anyone ever get anywhere? Mathematically, we know that infinite sums can converge to a finite number, but the paradox forces us to reconsider how motion really works. Are we moving through an infinite series of steps, or is our perception of movement just an illusion? But beyond math, this paradox applies to life itself. When pursuing a goal, there will always be one more obstacle, one more thing to do before we arrive. If we keep waiting for perfect conditions, will we ever truly reach our goals? Maybe the solution isn't to overanalyze the journey, but to trust that motion itself carries us forward, no matter how small each step may seem. 22. The problem of induction. Can we trust that the sun will rise tomorrow? Every morning, the sun rises. It has happened every single day of your life, and based on past experience, you assume it will happen again tomorrow. But here's the problem. Just because something has always happened doesn't guarantee that it must continue to happen. This is the problem of induction, a challenge to the way we gain knowledge from patterns. Think about a turkey on a farm. Every day, the farmer comes and feeds it. The turkey, based on past experience, assumes this will continue forever. But one day, instead of feeding the turkey, the farmer slaughters it. The turkey's belief in a pattern was shattered. If even something as predictable as the sun rising could, in theory, stop, then can we ever be certain of anything? This paradox forces us to question how we trust knowledge. Science itself is based on induction, observing patterns and making predictions. But if all knowledge is based on past experience, and past experience does not guarantee the future, then how do we really know what will happen next? Maybe certainty is an illusion, and all we can do is believe in the patterns that seem most reliable. 23. The Sleeping Beauty Paradox. Do you wake up with different probabilities? Imagine you are participating in an experiment. You are put to sleep on Sunday, and a fair coin is flipped. If it lands on heads, you are woken up on Monday and then never again. If it lands on tails, you are woken up on Monday, put back to sleep, and then woken up again on Tuesday. Each time you wake up, your memory is erased, so you don't know what day it is. Now, when you wake up, what is the probability that the coin landed on heads? At first, it seems obvious. The coin was fair, so it should still be 50-50. But consider this. If it landed on heads, you wake up only once on Monday. If it landed on tails, you wake up twice on Monday and Tuesday. Since there are two possible wake-ups for tails but only one for heads, some argue that when you wake up, the probability of heads is actually 1/3 and tails is 2/3. This paradox challenges our understanding of probability and self-awareness. If your own existence is being counted multiple times, does that change the likelihood of an event? And on a deeper level, how do we really know what's true when we can only perceive the present moment? Maybe probability isn't just about numbers, it's about how we experience reality itself. 24. The paradox of the unexpected hanging. Can you predict the unpredictable? A judge tells a prisoner, "You will be hanged next week, but the execution will be a surprise. You won't know the day until it happens." The prisoner, trying to outthink the judge, reasons, "If they wait until Friday, I will know on Thursday that it's the only day left, so it won't be a surprise. So they won't do it on Friday. Then, if Thursday is the last possible day, I will know on Wednesday that it must be Thursday. So it won't be Thursday either." By this logic, they can't surprise me on any day. Satisfied, the prisoner relaxes. But then, on a random day, the execution happens, and he is completely surprised. This is the unexpected hanging paradox, a logical puzzle that reveals the limits of human reasoning. The prisoner's logic seems flawless, yet it leads to a contradiction. He gets executed and is surprised, despite proving that this shouldn't be possible. The paradox shows how certain truths might be beyond prediction, no matter how much we analyze them. It also applies to real life. Have you ever tried to anticipate a surprise, only for it to catch you off guard anyway? Maybe some events in life cannot be calculated. They simply happen, defying all logic. Perhaps uncertainty itself is an essential part of how reality works. 25. The Bootstrap Paradox. Can something exist without an origin? Imagine you find a mysterious book containing detailed instructions on how to build a time machine. You follow the instructions, build the machine, and travel back in time to give the book to its past self. But wait, who wrote the book? If you got it from the past and gave it back to the past, it seems to have no point of origin. This is the Bootstrap Paradox, a time travel conundrum where something exists without ever being created. This paradox applies to more than just books. What if Beethoven's symphonies were never written by Beethoven, but instead given to him by a time traveler who brought them from the future? If that happened, then who really composed them? The music would have no true creator. It would just exist in a never-ending loop. The Bootstrap Paradox challenges our understanding of causality. We assume that everything has an origin, but what if some things simply exist in a closed loop with no true beginning? If information or objects can appear out of nowhere, then what does that say about the nature of existence itself? Could the entire universe be a bootstrap event, a reality that has always existed without a clear cause? 26. The Theseus Ship Paradox. If you replace every part of something, is it still the same? Imagine a famous ship, the Ship of Theseus. Over the years, its wooden planks begin to rot, so they're replaced one by one. Eventually, every single part of the ship has been swapped out for new materials. Now, here's the question. Is it still the same Ship of Theseus, or has it become something entirely different? Now let's take the paradox a step further. Suppose that someone took all the old, discarded planks and reconstructed the original ship from them. Which ship is the real Ship of Theseus, the one that gradually changed, or the one built from its original parts? This paradox isn't just about boats. It applies to everything, including you. Every 7 to 10 years, nearly every cell in your body is replaced. Does that mean you are not the same person you were a decade ago? This paradox challenges our understanding of identity and continuity. If something changes gradually, at what point does it stop being what it originally was? Does identity depend on physical continuity, or is it about the idea of something remaining the same? Maybe we are not fixed beings, but ever-changing processes, and the self is just a story we tell ourselves to create a sense of stability in a constantly shifting world. 27. The Omnipotence Paradox. Can an all-powerful being create a task it cannot do? If a being is truly omnipotent, it should be able to do anything. But here's the paradox. Can an all-powerful being create a rock so heavy that even it cannot lift it? If it can create such a rock, then there's something it cannot do. Lift the rock. But if it cannot create the rock, then there's also something it cannot do. Either way, it seems like omnipotence is impossible. This paradox is a deep philosophical problem for theology and logic. It suggests that absolute power may be self-contradictory. Some argue that omnipotence means doing anything that is logically possible. But then, does that mean even an all-powerful being is bound by logic? Others propose that power should be defined in a way that avoids self-contradictions. But that raises another question. Is true power about being able to do anything, or about having the wisdom not to create paradoxes in the first place? The paradox of omnipotence forces us to rethink not just power, but limits. Perhaps the greatest strength is not in being able to do everything, but in understanding which things should and should not be done. Maybe true omnipotence is not about infinite control, but about perfect understanding of when and where power should be applied. 28. The Grandfather Paradox. Can you travel back in time and erase yourself? Imagine you invent a time machine and decide to travel back in time to prevent your grandfather from meeting your grandmother. If you succeed, your parents would never be born, meaning you would never be born either. But if you were never born, how could you have traveled back in time in the first place? This is the grandfather paradox, a classic problem in time travel philosophy. This paradox suggests that changing the past may be impossible because it leads to logical contradictions. If time travel allows for changes, then it must also prevent those changes from occurring. One way to resolve this is through the idea of parallel timelines. Instead of erasing yourself, your actions create a new, separate timeline where you were never born, while your original self remains unaffected. But if every action creates a new timeline, does that mean infinite realities exist? The grandfather paradox doesn't just challenge time travel, it challenges the very concept of cause and effect. If the past can be changed, then nothing is ever truly certain. Maybe time is not a fixed sequence of events, but a fluid, shifting web of possibilities. And if that's true, then perhaps we are all time travelers, constantly shaping our own futures with every choice we make. 29. The Sorites Paradox. When does a heap stop being a heap? Imagine you have a heap of sand. If you remove one grain, it's still a heap. Remove another and another, it's still a heap. But if you keep going, at some point, you're left with just one grain. Is one grain still a heap? If not, when exactly did it stop being a heap? This is the Sorites Paradox, which challenges the idea of vague concepts. Terms like heap, bald, and tall don't have clear-cut boundaries. If a person loses one hair, they are not bald. But at what point do they become bald? This paradox shows that many everyday ideas rely on fuzzy definitions, yet we act as if they are precise. The Sorites Paradox also applies to personal identity and change. If you improve yourself a little each day, at what point do you become a better person? If society slowly shifts its values, when does it truly change? This paradox reminds us that language shapes our perception of reality, and sometimes, the distinctions we make are not as rigid as they seem. 30. The Freewill Paradox. If everything is determined, do we have a choice? Every action you take is caused by something, your past experiences, your biology, your environment. But if everything is caused by something else, then how can you ever make a truly free choice? This is the Freewill Paradox, which challenges whether we actually have free will or if we are just following an unbreakable chain of cause and effect. Some argue that determinism is true, meaning every decision we make is the result of prior events, just like a domino falling because the one before it pushed it over. If that's the case, then no one is truly responsible for their actions. We are just playing out a script written by physics and history. But if free will is real, then what causes our decisions? Can something happen without a cause? And if so, doesn't that just make our actions random rather than free? One possible answer is that free will and determinism are not opposites. Maybe we are both shaped by past events and able to influence the future. Perhaps free will is not about being completely uncaused, but about how we interpret and respond to the causes that shape us. In the end, whether free will is an illusion or a reality, the belief that we have it might be the very thing that allows us to live meaningful lives. 31. The paradox of the arrow. Is motion just an illusion? Imagine an arrow flying through the air. At any given moment in time, the arrow is in a specific position. If we freeze time, the arrow is motionless. But if at every single instant the arrow is not moving, then how can it ever move at all? This is Zeno's arrow paradox, a mind-bending argument that questions whether motion is even real. The idea behind this paradox is that time is made up of individual moments, like frames in a film. If each frame shows an unmoving arrow, then how do these still frames add up to movement? We assume that motion is continuous, but what if it is actually an illusion created by our minds, piecing together discrete moments? Modern physics, with its concept of quantum mechanics and Planck time, the smallest possible unit of time, raises the question of whether reality itself might be a series of static snapshots. But beyond physics, this paradox also applies to life. When we look at our daily existence, we might feel stuck, like nothing is really changing. But just like the arrow, even if we can't see movement in a single moment, progress is happening over time. Maybe the secret is to trust in motion, even when it seems invisible. 32. The liar paradox. Can a statement be both true and false? Consider this sentence. This statement is false. If the sentence is true, then it must be false, because that's what it says. But if it's false, then it must be true. This is the liar paradox, an ancient puzzle that reveals how language can break its own logic. The paradox appears simple, but it has deep implications. In logic and mathematics, contradictions are not supposed to exist. If something is both true and false, it destroys the foundation of rational thinking. Some philosophers argue that statements like this are meaningless, while others suggest that truth itself may not be as rigid as we think. In modern computing and artificial intelligence, the problem of self-referential statements like this one remains an important challenge. Beyond logic, the liar paradox reflects the contradictions in human nature. We sometimes say one thing and believe another, or hold contradictory opinions without realizing it. Maybe the real lesson of the paradox is that truth is not always black and white. Sometimes it exists in a strange paradoxical middle ground. 33. The Barber Paradox. Can a barber shave himself? Imagine a town where a barber follows a strict rule. I shave everyone who does not shave themselves and no one else. Now the question is, does the barber shave himself? If he does, then according to the rule, he shouldn't, because he only shaves those who don't shave themselves. But if he doesn't shave himself, then he should, because he shaves everyone who doesn't shave themselves. Either way, the rule contradicts itself, making it impossible for the barber to follow it. This paradox, created by Bertrand Russell, highlights a fundamental problem in logic and set theory: self-referential loops. It led to major developments in mathematics, particularly in the foundation of set theory, showing that certain logical systems are inherently flawed when they allow for self-reference. Beyond mathematics, the Barber paradox reflects real-world contradictions. Have you ever been in a situation where no matter what you do, it seems wrong? Or where a rule creates a problem it was meant to prevent? Maybe some paradoxes aren't meant to be solved. Maybe they reveal the limitations of the systems we try to build. 34. The paradox of choice. Does having more options make us happier? Imagine walking into an ice cream shop and seeing two flavors: vanilla and chocolate. Simple choice, right? Now imagine the same shop offers 50 different flavors. Suddenly, choosing becomes stressful. What if you pick the wrong one? What if another flavor is better? This is the paradox of choice. The idea that having too many options can actually make decision-making harder, not easier. Psychological studies show that when people have too many choices, they often feel less satisfied with their decisions. If you buy one pair of shoes from 5 options, you feel good. But if you pick one from 100 options, you might keep wondering whether you made the right choice. This paradox challenges the modern belief that more is always better. In today's world, we are bombarded with choices, from careers to relationships to entertainment. But are we truly happier with endless options? Or does simplicity bring a kind of peace? Maybe the key is not to have more choices, but to focus on what truly matters and let go of the fear of missing out. 35. The paradox of tolerance. Should we tolerate intolerance? A society that values tolerance should accept all viewpoints, right? But what if one of those viewpoints is intolerance itself? If we tolerate intolerance, it could grow and eventually destroy tolerance altogether. This is the paradox of tolerance, a concept introduced by philosopher Karl Popper. Popper argued that a tolerant society must be intolerant of intolerance, or else it will allow dangerous ideologies to spread. However, this leads to a contradiction. If we ban intolerant ideas, aren't we also being intolerant? This paradox plays out in debates about free speech, social policies, and the limits of open-mindedness. This paradox forces us to think about the balance between freedom and protection. Should all ideas be allowed, even those that threaten others? Or does protecting tolerance require setting boundaries? Maybe the real answer is not in absolute tolerance or intolerance, but in finding a middle ground, where openness exists without allowing destructive ideas to take over. 36. The problem of induction. Can we ever be sure of anything? Imagine you're observing the world and you notice a pattern. Every time the sun rises, it's followed by daylight. You've seen this happen countless times, so you infer that the next time the sun rises, daylight will follow. This is inductive reasoning, drawing general conclusions based on past observations. But here's the paradox. How can you be sure that the future will always resemble the past? Just because something has always happened a certain way doesn't guarantee it will happen again. Philosophers like David Hume pointed out that inductive reasoning is not logically justified. We assume that the future will follow the patterns of the past, but we have no logical proof that this is true. After all, just because the sun has risen every day for thousands of years doesn't logically prove it will rise tomorrow. The problem of induction makes us question our assumptions about certainty, knowledge, and even science itself. Can we ever be truly sure of anything? Or do we simply trust that patterns will hold? This paradox has wide-reaching implications, particularly for scientific inquiry. Science relies heavily on inductive reasoning. Based on the past, we make predictions about the future. But how can we trust these predictions if they are not guaranteed to hold true? Perhaps the best we can do is to accept that while we may never be able to prove our conclusions with certainty, we can make reasonable inferences based on patterns we observe and trust that they will hold until they don't. 37. The paradox of the unexpected hanging. When will the execution take place? Imagine a judge tells a condemned prisoner that he will be executed at noon on one weekday, Monday through Friday, but that the execution will be a surprise to the prisoner. It will occur on a day that the prisoner does not expect. The prisoner begins to reason. If the execution hasn't happened by Thursday, then it must occur on Friday. But then, if he knows it will occur on Friday, it is no longer a surprise. So he concludes that the execution must occur on one of the earlier days. However, when the execution finally happens, it still shocks the prisoner, as he couldn't predict it. This is the paradox of the unexpected hanging. It seems logical to the prisoner that the execution couldn't happen on Friday, but the very logic that leads him to this conclusion causes him to be surprised when it happens. This paradox challenges our understanding of prediction, surprise, and knowledge. The lesson of this paradox lies in our expectations and how our minds handle uncertainty. Often, we are trapped by our own reasoning into thinking we understand how something will unfold, only to be caught off guard when things don't happen the way we expect. Perhaps the more we think we understand the future, the more we set ourselves up for unexpected outcomes. And in the end, the paradox teaches us that uncertainty is a key part. 38. The paradox of the ravens. Does seeing a black raven prove all ravens are black? Consider this scenario. You are a detective trying to prove the hypothesis that all ravens are black. One day you spot a black raven, and you think, this is evidence supporting my hypothesis. But then, the paradox arises. Should seeing a white object, say a white shoe, count as evidence against the hypothesis that all ravens are black? Logically, it seems strange, but every time you observe a black raven, you are collecting evidence in favor of the hypothesis, while every observation of a non-black object seems irrelevant. The Raven Paradox, also known as Hempel's Paradox, challenges our understanding of evidence and confirmation. If all ravens are black, then seeing one black raven confirms the hypothesis. But this paradox also forces us to ask, does observing irrelevant things like white shoes or trees in a forest affect the truth of the hypothesis? This can be a confusing concept, as it highlights how confirmation bias can influence our reasoning. The paradox suggests that the way we gather evidence is often less direct than we think. Just because something supports a hypothesis doesn't mean it directly proves it. We need to be careful about what counts as valid evidence, especially in areas like science and logic. Maybe the real lesson here is that all evidence, even seemingly unrelated facts, should be carefully scrutinized before we accept it as proof. 39. The paradox of the lottery. Is it rational to play? Imagine a lottery with 1 million tickets, and you have one ticket. The odds of winning are extremely low, but someone tells you that the chances are not zero, and it's possible you could win. Rationally, it might seem unwise to spend money on a lottery ticket when the odds are so low. But here's the paradox. If everyone adopts this rational mindset and nobody buys a ticket, then the lottery will never have any winners. In the end, if nobody plays, there is no possibility of winning. The lottery paradox demonstrates a tension between individual and collective rationality. On a personal level, it might seem irrational to play, as the chances of winning are so slim. But on a societal level, for the lottery to exist and produce winners, someone has to play. This paradox highlights the difference between individual decision-making and collective outcomes. In real life, this paradox can be applied to many situations where individual rationality conflicts with group outcomes. Take voting, for instance. If you believe your single vote doesn't matter, you may be less inclined to vote, but if everyone thought this way, elections would be meaningless. The paradox teaches us that individual actions can have an unexpected impact on collective outcomes, and sometimes it's worth acting despite the odds.